Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our deep dive into the biography of the companion and a caliph of Islam called Uthman ibn Affan. It's very important for us to study history of Islam so that we are more wise. Let's continue. We're dealing with his significant personality traits and his asceticism. Let's begin. Bismillah. This is what Uthman was like. He was one of the richest people among the Muslims. However, the strength of his faith overcame his whims. This led him to become one of the greatest ascetics in the world. He showed all rich people that it is indeed possible for a person to be wealthy and practice asceticism at the same time. Okay, so not allowing him to be overly indulgent and to have more resistance towards worldly vanities. Gratefulness. Uthman used to thank Allah excessively, both verbally and physically. One day he was asked to interrogate some people who had been doing something suspicious. He set out, but when he reached his destination, they had already left. Afterwards, he freed a slave as a gesture of gratitude to Allah, who had kept him from humiliating other Muslims. So we do know that freeing a slave is a good deed, and dressing your slave in similar clothing, feeding them what you eat, and stuff like that. And so, when it mentions humiliating other Muslims, having to really get in the weeds with people can be a daunting task, so people can feel sort of embarrassed by being corrected, and so he was thankful that he didn't have to go about and do that. Checking on the people. Uthman was a loving man who was sincerely concerned about the well-being of his people. He would always ask how the Muslims were doing and would learn about their problems. So here, learn about their problems. This makes me think about when I'm older, how with my grandchildren, if I get to have any, inshallah, be very invested in what's going on with them. It's very common now for people to complain that their grandparents aren't involved. And so, if you're neglecting even your own family's problems, then of course you will forget about other people's problems. So I think once you start at home and then you build out, this helps you to actually just have more of a caring thing. But it's important not to make other people's problems your problems and not think that you can always rescue everyone. If you can help, you should. But if you overburden yourself with the drama of others, it can really wear you down. He would inquire about the absent, help those who had returned from traveling, and ask about the sick. The absent is important. What's interesting is my grandpa, he said that he was going to this church and he was ill for a little while, and none of the people there called him to see why he hadn't been in church. And I found that to be interesting. And I myself, when I don't see certain people comment for a while, because sometimes I'll read the comments before bed or I won't read them for a while, just to not have a bias. I used to respond to everybody, but people started insulting me and calling me crazy just for replying, even when it was just normal responses, so I didn't. But when I do see certain icons who've been around for a long time, their profiles that they haven't commented, I begin to worry about them and wonder if they're okay. And it's nice when you see people who've been around for a while comment, you know. So inquiring about the absent is something we can do in multiple ways in our life. Help those who had returned from traveling. That one's nice because when you get back from a trip, it's exhausting. I get car sick really easily, so I need to lay down, eat a sandwich, and have some sparkling water because it's carbonated, puts some air in my stomach, and just breathe. Traveling is not fun for me. I really hate it. So if someone can help you, that's quite nice. And ask about the sick. Imam Ahmed narrates from Musa bin Talha, who said, I saw Uthman ibn Affan on the pulpit asking the people about their news and prices. So basically what we can get from this is that to be sincerely concerned for your people is a very good trait. That you want to see if there's a way in which you can help someone. Now, this doesn't mean you're being a nosy busybody or having a savior complex, but it does mean that you pay attention to your surroundings. And I think that is quite important because we can sometimes have a very myopic view of ourselves. I can get really in my own world, and then people will complain that I don't reach out enough, I don't talk to them enough, and this has always been a problem, and so I have to make it a habit to check in on people and see how they're doing. But then when people do visit me, they're like, it feels like no time has passed because you're picking up like almost exactly where we left off. So just because I don't communicate doesn't mean I don't care, it just means that I'm doing things. But I get lost in the sauce and when it comes to books, and sometimes I don't call people when I should, so I have to work on that. Bin Saad narrates from him as well in At-Tabaqat, I saw Uthman bin Affan going out on a Friday wearing 2 yellow garments. He sat on the pulpit and the muadhin announced the call for the prayer while he was discussing and asking the people about their travels, those who had come back and those who were sick. MashaAllah, there you go. He was always concerned about his people's affairs and their needs. He designated an allowance from the state treasury for every newborn child. Now that is beautiful, see? Rewarding people for their fertility. Fascinating. I took some time to listen to some Rollo Tomasi because I do like to hear different perspectives to keep myself not in an echo chamber. And he was having a conversation about with some gentleman on his Rational Male Clips channel where he said that there should be, one of the gentlemen he was interviewing, that there should be a $25,000 tax break per child to incentivize men to have children and then reward the couple for staying together and them being the biological children. And the clip wasn't too long, so he didn't seem to elaborate on how exactly it would go about that. But I do think it's quite beneficial to not have heavy burdens of taxes on those who are actually producing children. And I think that's wise. And so you see here something from the state treasury for every newborn child. You can see how us Muslims should take care of each other and we should celebrate life. And I hope to as well be able to support my grandchildren if I get any, inshallah, with their newborn children. And if I had any sisters who were immediately around me, which I don't know any Muslim sisters around me who are having kids, like a newborn, but I would like to do something kind for them. And every woman is very touchy about what they want and what they need. But if I am able, I would like to be able to provide some form of service. Help her with her laundry, help her with her dishes, cook her a nice food, drop off some food I made, whatever it is. But this is a wonderful thing that a caliph designated money from the state treasury for every newborn child. And so, and he has all the annotations, like the footnotes numbered in the back of the book so that he can provide you with the sources for that. In this text, he doesn't provide them at the bottom, which would have been better in my opinion, but everybody wants to format their books that way. But when people are attacking Islam and we're educating ourselves like we're doing now, we'll have excellent rebuttals to be like, did you know that there was a caliph of Islam who designated an allowance from the state treasury for every newborn child. So correcting them, because Fox News really poisons people's minds, you know. Urwa bin Az-Zubair said, I witnessed the era of Uthman. Every Muslim had a right to something from Allah's wealth, meaning the state treasury. There you go. Constructively utilizing people's special skills. This refers to delegating tasks to different employees by taking into account their level of skill and whether or not they can perform a job as needed. Accordingly, an individual is assigned to work only in his or her area of specialty. This is a very wonderful thing. Areas of specialty. Because this shows that you may have a passion for something in the beginning, right? But is it what you're good at? Is it your specialty? And sometimes people, they have a specialty, but they're not really passionate about it. And so, putting people where they belong is a very important thing for an economy. Helping people discover what it is they're good at and asking people to really analyze themselves. This is practiced today and was also done by the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, and the rightly guided caliphs. Thus, during the era of Uthman, professionals and tasks were assigned to Muslims according to their specialties, as we will explain later. So, according to their specialties. So, having people who go about really investigating what everyone's good at and encouraging people to do some introspection concerning what they are in fact good at really does help boost morale. Uthman's superiority in doing this job becomes clearer when we look at the judicial, financial, and military establishments, as well as the way he ruled the conquered territories. Workers were assigned duties according to their respective specialties. Now, after Genghis Khan his grandchildren had become Muslim, I believe, from the biography that I read, he did this as well, where you weren't just butchering everybody as crow's food. You were saying, okay, we got some blacksmiths, we got some herdsmen, we got some people who are good at making pottery. Okay, where can they go? That's where we gotta put them. Can't just put everyone to the sword. We have to make people actually produce for us now. It's not just about conquering and colonizing, but rather extracting the skills as well. And so, we see Uthman could have been an example for that as well as the others I mentioned. Terms and conditions were implemented for them as well as for their employers. This played a major role in the success of the state ruled by the rightly guided caliphs. Utilizing the skills of qualified individuals, encouragement of efficient persons, and benefiting from their abilities and specialties were two characteristics that enabled our forefathers from the virtuous generations to remain powerful and dignified. This trait became apparent in Uthman when he recognized the efficiency of Zayd bin Thabit and appointed him and a committee to compile the Quran into a single edition. So, Zayd bin Thabit, I had a biography on him, but it was not a well-written book. I don't know what was wrong with it. I even think that some of the pages were put in wrong order because it was a terrible book. I had to put it in the recycle bin. But he comes up a lot in the hadith, and so we see here that he also helped to compile the Quran into a single edition. In this chapter, we have discussed the distinguishing characteristics of Uthman, all Muslim leaders, as well as other individuals who wish to follow the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ and the rightly guided caliphs in this life should take them as their role models. Learning about the qualities of our rightly guided caliphs and trying to emulate them are steps in the right direction in terms of understanding how a true pedagogical leader who is able to firmly lead the Ummah to its goals should behave. So here we see lead the Ummah to its goals. So, we Muslims are those who are chosen to lead us. We all have a unified goal here, right? It's not, well, the secularists just have a better system, and it's so much better that they rule us. There was a couple of Christians in my comment section who actually, a while back, who actually stated that when religion gets into the government, it gets messy, and so Jesus didn't want there to be a Christian theocracy. It's quite insane. But here we see, nope, we have caliphs. One day, inshallah, we'll have another, who actually care about the religion and its edicts and want to follow it. Okay? And that they will tell us how we are to behave. It's not like the Pope, who bends over backwards to appear as weak and docile and meek as possible so that the atheists don't destroy the Vatican. This religion will become established on earth only under such wise leaders. Such leadership is currently needed to implement the Sharia as a whole throughout the Ummah. I agree to that. Okay, now we're in part 3, the financial and judicial policies during the Caliphate of Uthman. MashaAllah, let's get into it. Getting into it. Financial policies during Uthman's rule. After becoming the Caliph, Uthman mostly retained Umar's fiscal policy, except that he allowed the Muslims to own significant amounts of property and land and to build palaces. Hence, as compared to Umar's strict one, Uthman's era was relatively easier for the Muslims. Uthman sent a message to the governors after taking office. He sent another to the tax collectors and yet another to the general public. The texts of these have been mentioned in the preceding chapters. In light of these texts, we conclude that the constituent elements of his fiscal policy were found on the following principles, which will be discussed. Okay, so following principles, fiscal policy. Alright? Here it says, implementing an Islamic fiscal policy. So here we see that as Muslims, we don't kowtow to the atheists and be like, yes, secular atheists, your high interest banking, everything about your fiscal policy is the best. No letting tax collection affect just ruling. Collecting from the Muslims their dues for the state treasury, giving the Muslims their dues from the state treasury, collecting from the non-Muslim citizens their dues for the state treasury and giving them their dues without wronging them. Appointing tax collectors who are trustworthy and faithful, guarding against financial corruption. So really looking out for financial corruption. Because tax collection, you have to really try to be honest. Really, because a lot of people want to increase taxes and then they have very little checks and balances on what the government actually spends things on. Uthman's intention to implement a fiscal policy. Without a doubt, Uthman was determined to apply a fiscal policy on Islamic grounds, as he had pledged to apply the rulings of Allah and the way of his messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the two caliphs before him. Uthman followed their lead, but also used his own judgment when necessary. He implemented the rulings of Allah in all issues, financial or otherwise. Okay, so we have one here. The zakah that was collected was placed in the state treasury and distributed to those who were entitled to it. The jizya that was collected from the people of the book was also kept in the state treasury. So we do see the jizya here. By paying jizya, they came under the protection of the Islamic State and safely enjoyed all its public services. Soldiers would send 1/5 of the spoils to the state's treasury. Okay, so soldiers, 1/5 to the state treasury. It would then be distributed to the orphans, the needy, and the wayfarers. It was spent in other areas as well in order to implement the following words of Allah. Quote, "And know that anything you obtain of war booty, then indeed, for Allah is 1/5 of it, and for the messenger, and for his near relatives and the orphans, the needy, and the stranded traveler, if you have believed in Allah, and in that which we sent down to our servant on the day of criterion, the day when the two armies met. Allah over all things is competent." Quran 8:41. So for the orphans, it is quite a sad thing how orphans are so neglected in the modern era, and how the wrong type of people get a hold of them. I'll protect us. These were some of the known sources of the state income. The fiscal policy in the area of the rightly guided caliphs was designated to implement the Islamic teachings and protect the state income. The expenditure on public welfare helped spread Islam. Okay, so expenditure on public welfare helped spread Islam, which instructed people to avoid extravagance and prevented the foolish from squandering their money as they wished. It was a generous fiscal policy, with some of the state income going directly to the weak. It was also free of dirty money. None of its income was earned through forbidden means, for Allah does not bless unlawful earnings. So halal income. That's a fascinating thing to think about, because how many wicked things contribute to America's GDP. That's something very fascinating to think about. Do Christians have a concept of dirty money? In fact, I've seen some women who do OF content who converted to Christianity say that they use that money they make to give to charity. And then there's some women who are still doing that content who have said that they give a portion of their money to feed the needy, and they feel like this expiates some of their sin, because they're not going to quit that institution yet, but they're going to use some of that to feed the poor. A secularist will say, sure, that's fine. But here we see in Islam that Allah does not bless unlawful earnings, so dirty money, sorry. So if you are out there selling drugs, like Pablo Escobar and El Chapo Guzman and others would, those are narcos traficantes, drug dealers, they would spend quite a lot on the needy, and this won them the favor of the poor people. And so people felt that, okay, well, we can't, the narcos are doing more for us than the government, so we can't help the government get rid of the narcos. It's really a paradox. But for us as Muslims, we need to be free of dirty money. So it's very important for us to see what is clean money and what is dirty money. That's the takeaway. Tax collection should not preclude just ruling. In his message to the governors, Uthman cautioned that collecting taxes for the state treasury had almost made them lose focus on their main priority, which was taking care of the people. Paying taxes is one of the duties of the people, and the ruler of the Islamic State is responsible for collecting them. It is not acceptable, however, for the ruler to let this one obligation override his other responsibilities. This makes it sound like don't focus on money grubbing. Don't just be accounting all day, like watching the coins pile up, as they say. Or for us in the modern era, just watching the graph ever grow, decrease, up and down, up and down, up and down. The collectors of tax on agricultural land are appointed by the state. So the state decides who's going to go collect that tax. And the income from this tax goes into the state treasury. If the collectors rightly take what the Muslims have to pay, they have performed their duty. In contrast, if they cross the line by wronging, harming, or overburdening their funders, then they become subject to the warning of Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him. After all, He has prohibited us from taking the finest of people's wealth when collecting zakah. Instead, He has ordered us to be moderate in collecting the zakah on crops. So the finest. In the past, you could imagine how people had to hand over their finest contributions. Let me give you an interesting example. So here we see, don't overburden the funders. There's a character, Negan, in The Walking Dead, who has a sort of tribute tax that every one of his communities must pay, otherwise he harms them. He bashes their head in with a baseball bat, who he calls Lucille, and he does other things. And the people who go to collect the tribute often are harmful to those people who they collect it from, often trivially taking something or hitting someone or burning them, and this burns revolution in the hearts of all the communities. They start to resent their ruler Negan for his overburdening them with tribute. And that is not moderate. He also wants the best, right? So with such a character, we see that he would want the best from everyone's things, and how this would be a problem for people. Now, when I read the histories of New Spain, I forgot what the actual title was, but it was a guy, Bernal Diaz, I believe his name was, who was on the conquest of Mexico with Hernan Cortez. It's a great book. And he talked about how they went to every tribe and were trying to convince them to revolt against the Aztec rule. And people pointed out how the Aztecs did demand quite a lot in tribute, and they hoarded the salt. And salt was a preservative. I mean, you could make beef jerky. It's a very important component for seasoning food and making things taste good. And remember, they didn't have refrigerators then like we do now. They didn't have freezers. They didn't have canning productions, the same thing, right? And so salt was a very important component. And the way the Aztecs behaved with people and how they overburdened their people with taxes led to them getting overruled in the end and getting conquered, and their rule being toppled. So, also, I believe the French during King Louis's reign, I forget the number, what he was, King Louis something, but he was funding a war, and people were really struggling financially, and he was increasing the taxes in order to fund his palaces and the war front. And this caused quite a lot of people to have rebellions. And so, if you notice through time, if you levy heavy taxes on people, they tend to resent it. Now, the paradox comes in, because remember, Islam is not communistic. What the communists say, and the socialists, we will raise your taxes, and then you'll have all these beneficial programs. But then we see that in healthcare, like the NHS in England, socialized medicine doesn't always work. But then in some Nordic countries, because they're smaller and they have such a high tax rate, it works out sort of for them. But they have a lot more controls over their society. So, and they rate really well on the happiness index. You see a balance, is what I'm trying to point out. Whether it's in fiction, because even when people write fiction, they're taking behaviors and psychological traits from history in order to create a story. Because if the story is too fanciful, you don't really connect with it. It's when it touches on a vein of truth that it actually stays within your mind. And so here we see that as Muslims, if you are in a system where you can act more in the Sharia, we would stand to reason that you don't want to overburden people, right? you don't want to take the best of what they have. So imagine you work very hard with your cattle, and your best stud can fetch a fine price. But imagine you've been breeding for several rounds, you finally got you a healthy stud that survived, he's fertile, has both testicles, because there are times where the animal will only have one testicle. You don't want to pass on that trait. One testicle doesn't drop. Like, in order to be a perfect stud, the specimen must meet a certain criteria, and that can be hard to get. And if someone takes your best bull, it can take you a while to recover from that. You may have a second best who's close, but it stings a little bit when you could sell something for a profit, but the government takes it. And yes, it's going to be a zakah, but if it's your best, it's like, oh, that could have been something that could have been sold, and you could have got some profit off of it, and then chose yourself how you wanted to spend a portion or a percentage of that on charity and such. And so we see the balance here that Uthman has laid out for us. Giving the Muslims their dues from the state treasury. State financial support is given to the Muslims, either directly or otherwise. The direct approach entails giving zakah money to those who are entitled to it, and distributing surplus wealth to the Muslims. So we see here, giving zakah money to those who are entitled to it, and then distributing surplus wealth to the Muslims, as dictated by the system. The indirect approach refers to the public services provided by the state, the expenses of which are covered from the state treasury. In both cases, justice must be maintained through equality and efficient procedures of distribution. Okay, now it says here, not mistreating the non-Muslim citizens and taking and giving with justice. When collecting the jizya from the people of the book, it is unlawful to treat them unfairly. They are citizens of the Muslim state and under the state protection for as long as they pay the required tax, and the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, commanded that they should be treated justly. The tax collectors have no right to harm, wrong, or overburden non-Muslim citizens. So here we see how people will be like, oh, like a lot of ex-Muslims and Christian anti-Muslim channels love to bring up the jizya, and they are very silent on the American tax code. Okay? They are very quiet on how much taxation Americans have on them. How much your wealth is taxed. It's wild how much the government takes away and how much the state takes away. Start paying attention to your receipts. Tax, 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 tax. For a freaking plastic bag, it's 10 cents. I bought like a drink in a glass bottle. There was a tax on glass bottles. Taxes are everywhere, and a liberal atheist solution, oh, well, we'll put a tax on this, a tax on that, and then we just gotta trust the people who collect that tax to actually fund what they're supposed to. Meanwhile, the politicians are flying on private jets, caviar, having orgies, all sorts of debauchery and hedonism, totally degenerate because, I mean, they're godless. And so they don't really care, and it becomes quite burdensome. So, for me, I think the jizya is just fine because it just provides the state with the balance of protecting. And an illegal immigrant, they may not pay all the taxes, but their paychecks are still taxed. And even if they pay cash for something in the store has taxes, right? So you buy an item, there's tax on it. And the people are still paying taxes on everything. So even if you're a non-citizen, you still have to pay taxes. Okay? If you're a traveler coming to America, you will still have, I still have a piece of lint right here. It keeps bothering me. I use the lint roller, but I can't seem to get it off. Pardon me. if you're a traveler, you're still going to pay whatever taxes are around here. So it doesn't really seem like a big deal. And regardless of your religion, the atheistic state is going to tax you. So, everyone's getting taxed. But they're like, oh, but it's a special tax. Yeah, and different states have different taxes. They have their own, each state is in charge of raising their own revenues. So, you have the federal tax and state tax, and there's even different taxes in different counties. So think about that tax code. The American tax code is way more burdensome than anything you're going to see concerning the jizya. I mean, if you're a Christian who just doesn't like taxes in general, then I'd be like, fine. But if you're somebody who is just not at all in concerned about taxes, and then you bring up the jizya and you're not looking at the American tax code and then like ripping your hair out, you're not an honest person. Now it says here, not mistreating orphans. Orphans have a right to state support, as clearly stated in the Quran. If they are poor, they are entitled to receive zakah. Zakah expenditures are only for the poor and the needy, for those employed to collect zakah, for bringing hearts together for Islam, for freeing captives or slaves, for those in debt, for the cause of Allah, and for the stranded traveler, an obligation imposed by Allah. Allah is all-knowing and wise. Quran 9:60. Orphans are also entitled to 1/5 of war spoils, as per the following verse. Now that's beautiful, because so Islam, even if there's war, and imagine you just got this chest full of gold, let's think of it that way, and then somebody's like, oh, we're gonna keep all this, and you're like, hey, hold up, gotta give 1/5 to the orphans. How many soldiers would be like, no, I don't want you? But Islam says, yes, you will. You will give some to the orphans and the needy. Now, is there anything like that automatically in Christianity? I haven't read it. Is there anything automatically like that in Judaism? I haven't read it. Does an atheist have a special 1/5 clause when they wage war in Afghanistan and Iraq? I don't think so. So it is quite noble to have that for the children. And know that anything you obtain of war booty, then indeed for Allah is 1/5 of it, and for the messenger, and for his near relatives, and the orphans, the needy, and the stranded traveler. If you have believed in Allah, and in that which we sent down to our servant on the day of criterion, the day when the two armies met, Allah over all things is competent. Quran 8:41. Okay, so you have to make sure that the orphans exercise their right to state support, and the state should remember they have a duty to the orphans. Appointing tax collectors who are trustworthy and faithful. Allah has mentioned, quote, indeed, Allah commands you to render trust to whom they are due, and when you judge between people, to judge with justice. Excellent is that which Allah instructs you. Indeed, Allah is ever hearing, seeing. Quran 4:58. And they who are to their trusts and their promises attentive. Quran 23:8. Uthman instructed his tax collectors to be trustworthy, lest they misuse the state treasury and mistreat those who fund the state. So here we see again the call for them to not misuse the state treasury, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all seeing, all knowing. You're gonna be punished for that, for how you mistreat the funds and betray your trusts. You need to be attentive to your trusts. Trustworthiness is a necessary trait of anyone who works with the public wealth. Yes, I don't trust any politician today. Uthman also commanded the tax collectors to be faithful to the people during the collection of taxes and to non-Muslim citizens by being gentle and fair in their dealings with them. Effects of luxury on the Muslims. Uthman wanted people to be aware of the reality of this world, so he warned them not to be enticed by worldly delights and pleasures. This really gets a lot of men and women. It really, really does. Pleasure. So, when it comes to women who sell themselves, when it comes to women who are quite... I can't seem to get it. It's made of cotton. So, I just can't get it off. It's bothering me. Sorry, fam. I used one of the tape rollies, and I still should edit this out, but I got it. There you go. Finally. People will see pleasure, like the atheist liberals. They'll be like, what's wrong with brothels? You know, that's part of the course. And you only have this one life, so you have to indulge. And worldly life is only good when you have worldly delight to excessive means, and that everyone must strive for the almighty dollar so that they too can indulge. And this is a fantasy that is sickening. He understood that luxurious lifestyle would lead some astray from the right path. This is true. I think you see this with Brother Sneeko. He struggles quite a lot. I really do think that, and I think that's what also Brother Andrew Tate struggles with as well, because he's constantly surrounded by whores, hookers, escorts, and lewd women, and he's able to delight himself endlessly. And there was a clip I watched of him a while ago, which it was his birthday, and there was a woman in a bikini on him, and he said, "I'm depressed. I'm not happy." And his brother Tristan was saying to him, like, "What are you talking about?" And Tate didn't look happy. And so you see, I'm not gonna do the work of going and looking up that clip, and plus it has a woman in a bikini, but it came across my X feed, my Twitter feed, and I watched it, and because someone was making commentary about spirituality, and I think a lot of people have to remember that you've got to be careful, because pleasure can get you into some trouble. I mean, men, I think, suffer so much because of the assets that women have, and if they're in a pleasure house, they could just live there. That's the problem. The danger of a king having so much wealth and then just spending his time whoring instead of doing his duties, it's really quite sad. It's really, really very sad. And worldly delight is represented oftentimes through beautiful women. I think Leonardo DiCaprio is an example of someone who refuses to marry and consistently only has younger women, and he's a huge fornicator, and so he's used his wealth to indulge in women. And Chris D'Elia, he was a funny guy, but he really is broken now. He got canceled because he was texting an underage minor, but a lot of girls do lie about their age, and they dress like they're 20, and they're built like they're 20. It's really quite... You men gotta be careful, but he admitted he had a sex addiction, and he made a joke one time that there's nothing inside of the woman. It's not like there's an end to the tunnel, but he would have this urge where he just has to keep going in to the women, and he always felt like he was trying to find something inside of them, but he realized he had a compulsion, a deep degeneracy, and he has a wife, I believe, and a child, and he cheated on her. And then, you see the people, for example, follow me here on this train of thought, because this is important. Because we as Muslims have to differentiate ourselves from those who are popular content creators. Brian Callen, Brennan Schaub, he cheated on his wife. Joe Rogan is a drug addicted hedonist to the fullest extent, and I've heard him many times recently even explain the necessity of intoxicants and how it takes, people to more creativity, and he's always shilling addiction, and he's always shilling porn and degeneracy. And if he flags channels that share clips, but if I knew how to do clips, I would right now insert every single clip, and it would be probably like 2 hours long. But he would flag, and I'm not trying to put that in people's heads, that filth. And so you see the popular content creators of men, they are all telling men to indulge in worldly delight via drugs, intoxicants, and excessive things like DJ Khaled. He just bought a $3 million watch. What is going on here? That's retarded. And then you always see them encouraging to use women, and for that to happen, women have to want to be used so that they can get. So pleasure is the center, and then both sides are using each other for worldly delight via intimacy and via materialism. And so we see here that, of course, that luxurious lifestyle will lead some astray. It doesn't mean that there aren't some weird people who do horrible things to animals in rural communities and horrible things to women concerning intimacy, right? You can be poor and have a terrible lifestyle as well. But those people are wicked, I would say, in a different level, because that shows that their soul is just putrid. But you can be a good person, and now that you have money, that's where the temptation comes in. A broke person who does crimes, I think, and does wickedness and degeneracy, does it because they like it and that's who they are. But a good person who comes into money can fall off their rocker because they now have the opportunity. And for men, once you get money, women, they fly around you like flies to poop, like a moth to a lamp. It is almost, impossible to swat them all away, because women like resources. No one wants the poverty struggle. I don't know any woman who likes the poverty struggle. They all want to have, bills paid, good health insurance, food on the table. It's important for survival to have resources. So women crave men with resources. And when a man has a surplus, this draws even more women. And then that's where the pleasure angle comes in. Well, now I can have this woman, that woman, a different one every night or every week. And then men get lost, and then their soul gets more putrid. So it's important to remember that the reality of this world is that you're going to be enticed. And so, very good point here. And then there's an ayat here for us. Quote, "And when we intend to destroy a city, we command its affluent, but they defiantly disobey therein. So the word comes into effect upon it, and we destroy it with complete destruction." Quran 17:16. And so, affluence. A lot of atheists will say Islam isn't a good religion because there are not any affluent lifestyles. And then they'll say that's why Dubai is not a good place, because Dubai has become affluent and a luxurious lifestyle, but it's now known across the world as a prostitute central, more than Miami, more than Las Vegas. And that's saying something, okay? If your whole country, I think Dubai is a country, right? I don't know. I'm not familiar with the geography, but you will see tons of hookers on Instagram being flown out to Dubai, and some say, "Oh, my trip in Dubai," and we know exactly why they're there, okay? And men when they're looking for a wife, they ask them, have you ever been to Dubai? Have you ever been flown out to Dubai? Oh yeah, I went. He was with my friend. And we just had a great time. Well, red flag. Avoid that. And so we can see that maybe there was a time where Dubai was considered Islamic, but with the money they're getting in, they're helping the wealthy men to indulge in pleasures and luxurious lifestyles that lead women astray and men astray. And so we have to be very careful because Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And so we too have to remember that lots of empires will come to destruction because they became affluent, and through that affluence they became indulging, they became heedless, and the perversions rose and didn't cease. And then once soft pleasure is boring and stale, then comes the violent pleasure. And a lot of people forget that. Where I think even Black Mirror did an episode where there was a guy, he was some type of doctor or scientist, I don't know, and he got this type of sensory thing where he could feel what the woman was feeling while he was having intimacy, plus his, and he became more violent over time, and he started to take out his teeth because things could start to make him feel pleasurable that weren't normal, and he went really weird and crazy. And so with technology advancing, we can see how that can become a problem, And Cat Williams once made a joke where he said, pardon me, it's quite vulgar, so I'm going to make it as PG as possible, but it elicits the point, okay? Through technology, certain toys have been invented for women that are battery operated, and he was saying how those women are zapping and zapping and zapping themselves, and that it's disfiguring their area down there in some way, I'm summarizing, and that they can't even feel connection anymore with their man unless they use it before, after, during. And so now the threshold is really, really high, so they're indulging in pleasure, and it's eroding their actual sensory experience. And adult content does that for men. It numbs them towards real women, and their gorilla grip will never be the same as an actual woman's area, and then this dulls them. And I remember that guy Hamza, that male influencer, he's like all smiles all the time. He said he used to have to watch adult content just to get it hard so that he could have intimacy with a woman. And that's insane, because he's not even 30 years old. I think he's, 27, 28? And he has erectile dysfunction. I mean, that's insane. What are you talking about? And you think about maybe 50 years ago, that was like unheard of, But with affluence, this has caused destruction in so many parts of the human psyche, human spirituality, and with crime. It's a fascinating thing. So there's so many ways you can prove this point that a retarded ex-Muslim wouldn't even consider, and where certain Christians will admit similarities in opinion, but then they'll call Islam extreme. And so the adornment of women shows a certain affluence and a certain capacity, right? And then with men's lifestyles concerning cars and other factors, watches, shoes, suits, you see how it starts to erode people's sense of self. Like where people get such a huge ego because of their luxurious lifestyle that they start to rebel against God, or even call themselves gods because they have commanded currency for a short time, they feel, but in reality it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has allowed you to get wealth, and you'll be tested through wealth, how you used it. You'll be held accountable. Allah is swift in accounting. So while you're going to be held accountable for how you spent it, right? So money is a test whether you don't have it I'd rather you have a lot. And you have to be very careful. There was a guy who owns a construction company who talked to my husband. I'm not going to say the construction company because I don't want any dots being made. But he had bought his son a Lamborghini, and his son drove it fast and died. His son died in a car crash with the very car his father bought him, and he regrets it. He has, I think, 5 other kids or something, and grandchildren, but he was very sad about it, and he wished he never bought that. And it was a luxurious lifestyle delight that led to the death of his son, who wasn't ready to handle such a machine. So there's so many lessons to show how decadence and affluence can destroy your society if you don't have a good, strong moral code. And atheism just can't compete with that moral code because their moral code is ever shifting, because they don't have a solid, concrete system. Now, there might be some atheists who are trying to create a dogma because of the onset of artificial intelligence, and they may invent a sort of cult that has a philosophy, right? But that'll still be man-made, right? That'll still be... So when they say, all religions are fake because they're man-made and they'll never work because they're man-made, but here, we have an atheistic philosophy that's man-made and it'll work. And you're like, I don't really get what you're talking about. Is it bad to be man-made or is it good? Whereas we Muslims, we believe our religion is not man-made, but their insult is about being man-made. So that's what's really strange. It doesn't make sense. Be mindful. You have to be very careful. Very careful. I think that's part of the reason why San Francisco used to be a very bohemian area, but there's a whole street which has like strip clubs. I've seen it. And it's wild how ugly San Francisco is now. And then you have in Oakland where there's poverty, but California is a pretty expensive state, and there's women selling themselves, walking around in thongs and high heels, and there's people who document this with their drones and post it on Instagram. And so that destroys a society. That destroys a society where the men are being enticed by pleasure and worldly delights through women, and that spreads diseases. It breaks up homes and families and puts the women in a dangerous position. For example, I saw maybe a week ago there was a news story in the Daily Mail that talked about a woman who was going to charge $2,000 for a session, and her customer ended up murdering her. So when a hedonistic feminist tells you, well, the higher priced people are safer, this just isn't true. You can get a deviant in any economic class position, and that field will always be a dangerous field. Okay, so very important. We've learned quite a lot in this section, I'd argue. So we see here that tax collectors are to be trustworthy, and that zakah expenditures are for the poor and needy, and that orphans are entitled to 1/5 of the war spoils, that you're not supposed to mistreat the non-Muslims, but rather, be just and don't overburden people, and it's so much more. So let me know what you think. We've discussed some very serious topics, and I got some new blog posts up. So if you want to check those out, go ahead and join the blog. It's $5 a month, supports the channel. I'm not monetized on any platform, and that's a great way to support a nerd, support a scholar philosopher. Take care, fam. It's www.subscribestar.com/MilhanArchive. Hope to see you there.